Thanks, Jill. Well, wonderful. Super excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen in a moment, but before I do that, I just want to chat for a little bit because I know that once you start seeing the screen, some of this other stuff drops away for others. First of all, really excited to have everyone here. I did want to just kind of get a little bit of a feel for obviously where everyone's coming from, but also how you heard about this. So if you wouldn't mind in the chat, if you have been to an Alma La Vida event before, just type yes. If you have not, type no. And if you type no, I'd love like a little dash of like how you heard about us, searched it on Eventbrite, friend told me something, I don't care, whatever, just something so we kind of know. Because we usually get about good 50-50 of folks who've been here before. Okay, good. Seeing a lot of new. Perfect. Great. Friend is a client. Yep. Great. Good. Good. Okay. Great mix. So this is great. You can keep typing those things into. That's helpful for us. And it's great for Jill to kind of see what's going on as well. So, all right, we'll keep those messages going. As you know, Jill will be monitoring the chat. I will have it up. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to put attention on it when I'm talking to you, but we really do care. We want your voice to be heard, and we want you to communicate too. So what's cool about these events and what's cool about Alma La Vida is we are a coaching firm. I'll talk a little bit about that. So what that means is I'm not just here to talk at you and completely train and workshop you to death. We want this to be collaborative. So if I ask a deep, powerful coaching question, give me an answer, please. It'd be great. It'll help you to both engage and the content will sink in a little bit better, but then also you'll get to see others' responses. And the more that one person collaborates, someone else will, it's kind of a great followers thing. We'll pull others in as well. We all learn from each other. So please don't hesitate to type questions, throw some comments out, whatever. And if you do need anything, you can even private message Jill at that Alma La Vida coaching. That's her if you need to have any questions for her. All right, so I am going to share my screen. I do have a few slides for us to review today. Let's see, share, and I've got it open right here. So the topic of this leadership training we're talking about today is you're a manager, now what? Now, I'm going to review in a moment the 4 kind of key areas that we were planning to talk about, but we will spend a lot of time in this sort of concept around being a newer manager. I don't want to scare anyone who's been a manager or a leader for a long time away, because 100% you're still going to get value out of the content that we share today. But if you are newer to management or you are about to go into management, I'm hoping there'll be some really good, strong takeaways for you that you can kind of write down and hopefully apply right away. All right. So I already kind of asked the question around where everyone's from and whether you've been to an Alma La Vida event or not, but I'm going to talk about Alma La Vida for 2-3 minutes, something along those lines. If you have questions on anything I say, you're welcome to go ahead and type those into the chat. I'm just pulling the chat back up on my screen here, and Jill will be sure to answer those as we're going through. So Alma La Vida is a leadership, career, life, and health coaching company. We do both, I would say almost like personal stuff, like you and I here talking individually here today, right? We have a lot of clients that are on the line already, but we also work with corporations. So I just want to highlight that to say we really are sort of touching those in all facets and all areas. As we're talking about management, we are talking a little bit more about leadership, which is kind of my passion area and what I have a tendency to talk about. And we really do believe that great leaders aren't born, they're made. So none of us are just born into this idea of leaders, and we might need to learn, hey, how can we even leverage some of our own skills to become better leaders? Or have you ever had a situation, whether it was a managerial role or not, where you were on one team and you felt really successful and you were thriving, and then you moved to another team and it almost just felt like you were starting over? And maybe that's just the complexity of the job, or who your manager was, or who your peers were, or who your employees were. Every job we have, every time we move around, we're going to have some innate key skills that we bring along with us, but things are just going to change. So we need to kind of always be building and growing on our leadership skills. So when we talk about coaching, if you haven't had the chance to work with a coach before, it's a little different than a mentor or a consultant, but it's that person that's going to show up with you to really deep dive and assess where you're at on your journey, map out some sort of plan of what your journey might look like, and then support you on the way of getting there. You're the one that's going to do the work. You're the one that's going to do the actions, tick off the goals, line off the things on the to-do list. but the coach is going to be there to ask you powerful questions, and in some cases provide some really great tools and resources to help move you forward, especially if you're a little bit stuck. So we've got some really great blog posts around what coaching is, if this is new for you. Jill, maybe that's a good note. We can share a couple of those really great coaching blog posts in our follow-up, just so that if you're kind of like, I don't really get what this coaching thing is, hopefully that will help a little bit. But really think about someone being there, asking you deep and powerful questions to pull the information that's hopefully already innate in you out. And you can almost think of it like holding up a mirror. We talk about, we want to sort of shine a light on what your strengths and your blind spots might be, so that you can really take specific actions to working through them and creating healthy habits moving forward. So it's all about being our better selves and growing as we move along. So that's a little bit about what Ama La Vida does. From that corporate standpoint, there are a lot of workshops, somewhat similar to what we're seeing today, group coaching, team coaching, again, one-on-one coaching, and a whole slew of programs that go along with it, in addition to our e-coaching platform that we utilize that is just sort of extends the life of the coaching with supplemental training. So I said hello already. I'm Jen. You can call me Jen. I'm Jennifer Maynard. Whatever you see on the screen is fine. Either is fine. I'm the Director of Leadership Solutions here at Ama La Vida. And as you can tell, I'm very passionate about that leadership side. And that's what we'll be talking a lot about today, is that leadership and managerial stuff. But I'm kind of the behind the scenes person that helps to craft programming for corporations. So if you did this workshop today and you said, Jen, we really need a workshop on feedback, I'd be the person you'd talk to, and we'd get the ball rolling on what that might look like for you and customizing something for your company. Okay, so we already talked a little bit about where we're calling in from today. I would love for folks to drop in the chat. This has been a really interesting conversation. Are you working from home? Are you working in an office? Or is it maybe even like a hybrid situation? It's just kind of interesting to know where everyone is at right now. We're still in this crazy, weird COVID world. There's a lot of, we're going to start doing transitions, and some people have slid back on that. So it's a little bit of a mix. Yeah, so even in the response here, we're seeing a good 50-50 mix. Office, hybrid, home. I mean, really, it's a little bit all over the board. So that's fascinating, right? And this is going to bring up different challenges for all of us. And even in the very specific things we're talking about today, when we're talking about communication, how does it look different? Is it different when it's hybrid versus in the office? There's going to be a lot of things like that will come up. So don't hesitate to think about, how does what Jen is sharing apply to me in my situation? And is it maybe even different than it was a year ago? What does it look like for me? How is it different? So kind of be reflecting on a lot of that as we go. Okay, I already asked this question too. If there are any current clients, I would always love for people to just shout out their coach. So feel free to put that in the chat if you would like to. We talked a little bit about where you're working from, so that hybrid or office. I'm always interested too, what companies are you working at? And do you get any personal development budget? Is this something that your company is doing? We're having a lot more organizations that are starting to provide personal development budget. And for anything, right? To go to a conference, maybe it's for coaching, which would be fabulous. Maybe it's for workshops, maybe it's for LinkedIn learning, right? A whole kind of variety and slew of things that we're being provided budget for. So it's always interesting to kind of share that as well. And if you have that opportunity to take advantage of that within your organization. Okay, so this is where we have some, looks like a huge agenda. I will tell you right now, like I mentioned earlier, there are some great topics that were in this event. I was going to say webinar, leadership training that we're going to cover today. And we will cover and touch on all of these. I've got some like pro tips around each of these: managing people who used to be your peers, preparing for one-on-one meetings, giving feedback, growing your personal leadership brand. But those literally, each and every one of those could almost be a full day of training. So as we go through this, I want you to keep in mind, I'm just giving you some top tips to get you thinking, to get you reflecting, to get you started. What can I do with this information? And then from there, you can really think about, what are those next steps that I need to do, and what does that look like for me? And I'm going to cue you up with some next steps and things to do at the end, so that you at least feel like you're leaving today knowing, okay, I've got a little bit of information. What am I going to do with that information as I go forward? Okay, if at all helpful, or if at all possible, I'm going to skim back. Here's those 4 topics, right? I would love to hear pick one, and maybe it's even, if you want to just do a number, we have number 2 is managing people who used to be your peers, 3, 4, and 5. Number 2, 3, 4, and 5. Which one are you most interested in? What is going to be the most important or helpful for you today? If you could only pick one of these 4, throw it out there just so that I can kind of see where we're leaning heavily, and then we'll know how to maybe tailor some of the conversation. Okay, this is good. Of course, there's a great mix. I am seeing a lot of 4s and 2s, couple 3s, definitely some 5s in there too. Of course, I'm feeling like 2 and 4 are a little bit the heaviest, but this is a pretty good mix. So that's really great. Okay, so 2 is managing people who used to be your peers. The good news is the tips we're going to talk about in there really will apply for anyone. I think they extra apply for this concept of, managing someone who used to be a peer, like if you're promoted within your team, but you'll quickly see how they apply to everyone. So I think everyone's going to really benefit from 2. We'll probably spend a little bit of the majority of our time there. 3, I'm not seeing a ton of those, but the good news is we will spend a little bit less time there, and I will give you a tool and a resource to continue and extend the learning beyond. Giving and receiving feedback, I will spend a little bit of time here. What I'm going to cue this up with is we have some really good former and past trainings that we have done on our YouTube channel. Jill will have that in the follow-up for you to access. We've got a lot of really good ones there. So another, seriously 45, 60 minutes of training on feedback, and there are more than one of those. So I encourage you to go watch those of you who picked 4, and know that you're going to get a lot out of that. And then we will talk about how to receive feedback well too, because I think that's one that doesn't get touched on enough. So we're going to make sure that we shift into that. And then growing your personal leadership brand. I saw some 5s within there as well. We're going to leave you with some great resources on that too. So I think we will be spending most of the time in 2 and 4, but everything will have a little bit of conversation. Okay, so that's what we just talked about. All right, so just real quick, now I've talked at you quite a bit, but logistically, this is being recorded, as Jill said. Please be present. Please be present. I want all of you to get the most out of this. Turn your Slack off, turn the radio down. Radio, why did I say radio? Who even has a radio anymore? Put the phone on silent. Whatever your preferred method for taking notes is, whether it's typing or writing, be prepared for that. I'm going to prompt you a number of times to write an action down, or, reflect on something, or go later and do X, Y, Z. And I want you to be able to write some of that down. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you have them. Please do attend more events, especially for those of you, it's the first one. We've got quite a few on the docket. I've even got one next week that I'm going to be going through. This is just the bit.ly short link to access it easily, and it's case sensitive, but Jill will have that in the follow-up as well. I should say I've now said Jill, follow up a million times. So I should put on the logistics, one of your actions and your takeaways is make sure you read the email that Jill sends you. So keep that in mind as you see that come through. I have this note here, get your career development sponsored. The reason I have this here is because we often forget to even think to ask, like, hey, do we have money to get my coach paid for? It does not hurt to ask. And we actually have a really helpful and supportive e-coaching module that will walk you through that process of crafting an email around what you want that career development sponsorship to look like and asking for it. So we can provide that as a helpful tool as well. It's just a reminder though, it doesn't hurt to ask. And then if you are interested and hey, coaching has already been on the radar for me, I just need to figure out who the right coach is. I need to talk through the goals that I want to work on. If you are ready, this is the bit.ly link, again, Leader Convo, to go ahead and schedule that leadership coaching consultation with one of our specialists who know all of our leadership coaches extremely well and will match and pair you with the perfect one. We will talk about that at the end. I just like to put it up here just in case someone's like, yeah, I want to put that up on my screen, so I'm ready to go. You're welcome to do that. All right, well, let's dive into it. So first thing is managing people who used to be your peers. So this is where I want to sort of turn it on you and ask a couple of questions of those. We had a lot of people say that this wasn't interesting for them. This was one of the number 2 on the list. So I want to kind of put this question out there. Why is it challenging to manage people that used to be your peers? What about this is so challenging? And it's okay if it takes you a minute to kind of type a sentence or two, but start throwing some of that stuff out there. What makes this challenging? What is it? How is this a barrier to us being a good manager and doing our job well? Stacy says attitudes. Okay. We know there's secrets and possible white lies. It's true. Friendships, former friendships, there's so much more that we know. We have vented together. We have talked about the horrible, crappy managers together. It is so true. The dynamics of the relationship changes. That's really key. And then how does that affect boundaries and some of these other things, right? Being younger, I feel like I have less authority, right? Or maybe we have a little imposter syndrome. What's going on with us and how we relate to this team now is completely different. Being assertive without being the bad guy or gal, right? Absolutely. Younger, there's another one. Maybe lose trust within the hierarchy. Okay, so lots of great stuff there. All this is really true, right? I'm sure some of you can really resonate with some of this. I think this one April said is really important here too. Sometimes it's hard to provide critical feedback to someone that you consider a peer or a friend. 100%, right? We're all human. Feedback is already hard, let alone someone you might have a different type of relationship with, a deeper relationship with. Even just think about in your past when you've needed to provide feedback maybe to a close friend or a family member, not even work related, right? Outside of work. It's easy to say, hey, you got like a poppy seed in your tooth, right? Maybe that one's not as hard. But what if they really have a blind spot that you need to draw attention to? It's really hard. You don't want to hurt these people. So very hard. Boundaries coming up again too. So absolutely right. There are so many barriers to doing this well. 100%, so many barriers to doing this well. So what we're going to migrate into now, and I apologize, there's a lot of bullets on the screen, so bear with me. You could take a screenshot if you want to go back and look at it later, but I only have one slide. I don't want to do a million slides. Instead, I want to put a lot of stuff on one slide. So we're going to walk through some, I'm just calling them pro tips, right? So we're going to talk about some things that could help us to overcome some of these challenges that we have. Okay, so number one, communicate. All right, everyone's going, yeah, I know that, right? Communicate, I get it. But the second piece is really important. How can you think about clearing the air a little bit, starting fresh? I'll say start fresh probably a million times here, but start fresh, level set. That's another word I use all the time. Clear the air with some very transparent dialogue. And I don't have the word here, but I would almost even say vulnerable dialogue. So we talk about vulnerability in leadership a lot. And if you haven't read any of Brene Brown's materials or books, I would encourage you to sort of write that down as a potential homework assignment to go back and think about how this concept of vulnerability might be able to help me in my leadership. Vulnerability is all about leaning in when the conversation gets tough instead of backing away when the conversation gets tough. So you could probably just right out of the gate think of multiple ways that could be a tool that's utilized, whether someone is being abrasive in a meeting, whether there's confusion in a meeting, maybe there's a social justice conversation coming up. I don't know, right? There could be so many times where it's like, ooh, we need to be a little bit vulnerable and we need to lean in. So when are those times that you need to lean in? And what does that look like now as you're starting fresh with this new team? What would it feel like to be transparent and say, hey, this is going to be tough. We're going to have a new type of relationship. Let's talk about the challenges that this is going to bring up for us. I mean, what if in a one-on-one we sat down and you pulled me aside and say, Jen, I really value our friendship. I know this is going to be very different with me being your manager now. I'd love to sit down and just have a really transparent dialogue around some of the challenges this is going to create for you and I, and create some norms or how we can work together through this. You can do this as a group, you can do this as a team, you can do this one-on-one, especially if you know that you have maybe different relationships with different individuals. So why not consider pulling them aside into that one-on-one time and being transparent, being a little bit vulnerable, saying, this is going to be tough. Like this is hard. This is hard for me. You're not revealing anything confidential. You're not crying and being overly emotional. You're just saying like, hey, we got to work through this together. And then this idea of creating some norms or rules or operating rhythm for, we use this example of the two of us, you and Jen, is just going to be really helpful for your relationship. So I want to pause right there, and I just want to see in the chat, and you don't have to say no if you're not comfortable, but does anyone see how just this simple tactic could be helpful for their particular situation. Like everyone's situation is a little bit different. So just pop in a yes if that feels like that could be something that's maybe a little bit helpful for me. Okay, good, good. Okay, so I'm going to migrate on to the next one, but I really want you to sit with that, right? What does this communication look like? How can I be transparent? How can I be vulnerable? How can I create some norms, rules, operating rhythm, something that, Lorna, amazing point. They could be just as confused as I am, 100%. And that jumps us down to, it's on here somewhere, right? But like, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that they aren't. And maybe don't even assume that they are, right? That's why we ask those deep, powerful questions. That's why we have the conversation. We sit down and we say, hey, this is tough for me. Is it tough for you too? And if you're vulnerable and you lean in and you start the two-way dialogue, then it's going to open it up. And Sarah, to your point, it gives them the freedom to start asking questions. Maybe they wanted to ask, but didn't feel like it was safe before. And not safe because they don't have a trust with you, but just because there are new dynamics. And we don't know these new dynamics yet, right? So great, fabulous. So communicate, clear the air, transparent, vulnerable, rules, norms, questions, get it all out. Just get it all out on the table, because then you can start fresh and figure out what to do with it. All right, so we're going to keep migrating on. Some of these other ones have to do with team or individual behavior, but one thing I really want to highlight here is to listen, actively listen, not just passively listen, but actively listen, and listen a lot. One of the things that we work on with our leadership clients is how to show up as a coach, which means we really spend a lot of time around active listening, deep questioning, and frankly, providing really good feedback, and how all three of those work together. This active listening component is so important. We don't have time to go into the details today of what active listening is. There are some trainings that you can go find out there. You can work on this with your coach. But even just as we're sitting here talking and having a dialogue right now, a little different because your dialogue is typing through the chat. If you are just listening passively to hear what I'm saying, you're going, yep, Jen said listen a lot. And maybe you're saying, okay, yep, Jen got it, listen a lot, move on to the next bullet. Like you're just kind of like ready to move on. But if we're like really actively listening and deep listening, we're understanding that whatever those other things Jen says are, as I continue to forward on and say, here's what listening is, da, 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 da. We didn't just get stuck on that first word. It's really important. So I'm going to give like one other sort of example. Let's say Jill and I are having a conversation, and Jill comes into my office and says, whoo, Jen, I am really stressed out. And my response is, oh my gosh, I am so stressed out too. It has been just, man, it's been a tough week. We're just having a passive conversation. And that's what happens a lot just in even just normal everyday conversation with friends, right? It's listening to respond. We're listening to respond. I heard what she said. She's having a stressful day, and I responded in some fashion. Well, there's two levels below that, and this is where that deeper understanding within active listening gets. But that deeper level might be, oh, Jill, that is really tough. I'm sorry to hear about your stressful day. What are some of the things that I could do to help you? What can I take off your plate, right? I start inquiring maybe and asking her some questions and helping her to clear the air around that stress that she has, versus just responding and saying, oh, me too. I know, it's crazy. So as a manager, I want you to think about, how can I take myself away from just listening to respond and going to that much deeper level, listening to hear, listening to understand, and to that active listening level? And how can I make sure, the reason I say a lot here is, are you talking too much? Are you talking too much? And I love in the chat, like if you feel safe enough to respond to this question, as a manager, do any of you feel like you talk too much? I do sometimes, and I have to remind myself, it's not just me. Like I shouldn't just be talking. We feel a lot of this weight and pressure as managers sometimes, that we have to have all the answers. We have to give the direction. We have to know what to do. All of those things, right? We are perfect. We're here because we're the ideal candidate. That's just not the reality though. Like I'm giving you permission right now to take those like disgusting weights off your shoulder, those managerial weights, take them off your shoulder, and really just start thinking about, how can I just show up and listen a little bit more, and maybe ask some questions to help pull really great information out of others. It's very easy to get into that trap of talking a lot. And there are a lot of reasons why. It's the manager weight. It's the psychological, we don't like silence. So as humans, we work to just fill the void of noise with noise of some sort, right? There was someone was talking about, oh yeah, imposter syndrome. Like we feel like we need to prove it to our peers sometimes, and and other managers sometimes as well. So there's a lot of reasons why that happens. But I want you to think for a moment, maybe even like one of the last meetings that you were in and you heard another leader, CEO, someone talking, and they asked just some like really good questions. And you like walked out of the meeting, you're like, man, Bob always asks like really great questions. And sometimes we don't really realize that's going on, but it's the sign of a great leader. They're asking questions so that everyone gets the chance to collaborate. Everyone gets the chance to be heard. Everyone starts to feel empowered and a part of the process. So those questions are just super critical. And I'll tell you right now, we're not talking about micromanagement today, but whether you identify yourself as a micromanager or not, there are absolutely employees out there who want to be micromanaged. How many of you have an employee who wants to be micromanaged? They want to know exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, why to do it, every single detail. And is it not like the most exhausting thing on the planet? Because your job is not to run around and make sure that Bob knows what to do all the time and give him direction and all this stuff. It's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. You will have those individuals, and they will not stop being that way until you take some ownership to say, I'm going to start listening a little bit more, and I'm going to start asking them a lot more questions. And I will tell you right now, it's not going to be easy at first. This process takes a lot of practice, which is why it's a great thing to work on with your coach. But B, it's a change for that individual too, right? They are used to getting direction. They are used to being told what to do, all of that. So now we're in this point where I have to start asking questions of Bob to say, well, what do you think some possible solutions might be for this, Bob? And I may have to be prepared for Bob to say, Jen, I don't know. That's why I'm in your office asking you right now. Like, I don't have a clue. So I have to be able to find new ways to sort of challenge him or questions to ask to start pulling things out of him. Well, what did you do last time? Or who have you talked to? Or who's done this before? Anything that might just start getting some thoughts flowing for Bob. Okay, so I'm going to move on, but I just can't harp on this listening enough. So here we've talked about communicating, we've talked about listening, all of these, and this overarching theme of sort of showing up as a coach and how this concept is very new. If we are a servant leader and we show up as a servant leader, the concept might not be new to us, but we still may not be doing it very well. So how can you work at a deeper level with your coach on some of these key skills, practice them, and start to get some, thoughts on how to do that for you and your team successfully going forward. Okay, keep moving on down the list. Start fresh. I know I said that like 3 times now, but it's true. Start fresh. As you are transitioning into this role, start fresh. If you took this role, this new job 6 months ago, that's okay. You can level set and start fresh anytime. And there's always a good time to say, hey, we need to pause right here and we need to talk about what's going on. So don't be afraid to start fresh. Remove assumptions. Someone said that up within there. I can't remember who it was, but remove assumptions is really key because we make a lot of assumptions on what people need or want. We make a lot of assumptions on what people know. And if you already have a relationship with them, you are naturally going to be making assumptions because I already know that this is Jill's style, or I already know that this manager drives Jill crazy, or, I already know those things. So I'm making all these assumptions about how I'm going to work with Jill or what Jill needs from me, but stuff changes. The reality is stuff changes. So don't make assumptions, start completely fresh. It's almost like just giving the benefit of the doubt and starting all over. If you're not familiar with the ladder of inference, that's what I mean by this climb back down the ladder. You can even just Google ladder of inference and watch a short 5 or 10 minute video on it. Psychological term, but just really simplistically, things happen. Like, let's say Bob comes into work late. The first time he comes in, it's sort of like, oh, that's a bummer, Bob's late. The second time I start thinking, gosh, what's going on with Bob? Like, I can't give Bob any new projects. The third time he comes in late, maybe it's like, all right, that's it. Bob's lazy. I can't give Bob any work to do. And I just jumped up the top of the ladder of inference and just made these big assumptions about Bob and his behavior. Where if I would have stopped and talked to Bob, maybe I would have found out that, he's got a sick family member at home, he's balancing some things, and he just needs a little bit of graciousness and gratitude from me for a short period of time and support to get back on the track. I don't know, something along those lines. But the whole point is, don't bounce up that ladder of inference, because remember, you have relationships with these individuals. We need to go right back to the bottom, and we need to start fresh. We almost need to recraft those relationships and what we know about these individuals in a new way. Walk the walk just really means we need to be modeling the behavior we want others to see. This is probably one of the more obvious things, and I'm sure even you've heard it a million times before, but it's like, if you show up late, everyone else is going to think it's okay to show up late. I'm using a weird extreme example there, but model whatever behavior you want others to exhibit. And if that means you need to change something that's in your pattern right now because of the relationships you had in the past, think about that. Okay, create boundaries. I'm making this sound simple. We could talk about boundaries again for an hour as well. But when we talk about boundaries, what I want to highlight is I have discussed them. So remember back way up in Communicate, where I was saying, hey, we could create some norms, we could create some rules, some operating rhythm, this type of thing. What we want to think about is, how can we have an honest conversation around what those boundaries are and create those norms and rules around them, whether it's with individuals, with teams, whatever it might be. I want to give you a simple example that's related to the next bullet that says, don't allow venting. Venting is just a very unhealthy approach. And if you have a relationship where you have a friendship with individuals and you were used to doing that venting thing a lot, it's very easy for them to pick that up and want to continue doing it. And they're trying to pull, even inadvertently, like pull information out of, like, well, how do you feel about this? So what we want to do is set up some guidelines or some boundaries that say, like, hey, if you're having a tough day, I totally get it. You can come in and just like dump on me for 5 minutes. And then I'm at the 5-minute marks when I'm going to say, hey, let's pause right here and let's start talking about what some solutions are for going forward, so that we don't consume an hour's worth of time whining and complaining about others. If you've heard of like above the line and below the line thinking, this is another kind of tool or example that we use in coaching, very related to that. When we're living below the line, there's a lot of finger pointing. It's that person's fault. There's blame. Nothing is my fault. There's just no ownership. When we're living above the line, there's a sense of ownership, responsibility, accountability. This is where we want our people to be living. This is where we want to be living, and we should be modeling that behavior, of course. But very important to be thinking about that as we allow things like venting that all of a sudden get us in that space where we're moving below the line because we're finger pointing, we're blaming, we're not taking responsibility when things go wrong. All of us will have some sort of responsibility that we can take when there is a problem. Even if you weren't the one who hit the button that made it happen, what could you do differently? Could I have set that person up better for success so that they wouldn't hit that button incorrectly? I don't know, right? But how do we make sure that we're shifting that dialogue that we have with our team to that above the line thinking, not allowing the venting, and in turn creating boundaries that just make it a lot easier for us to operate and not accidentally fall back into that friend zone. So I use this venting example as a good one to say, if you keep falling into that friend zone, you need to set some of those boundaries. And it might look like, hey, let's just only allow like 5 minutes for these discussions and move on to the next thing, but it's going to happen in that clear, open, transparent, vulnerable time and dialogue. Okay. The next one that I have down here is create equality. This is just important because if I was best friends with Jill and there's 5 other people on the team, are the 5 other people on the team going to be thinking, oh, she's going to be treating Jill special? Jill's going to get all these great things that we're not going to get. So just make sure you're really drawing attention to, do I have any bias in the way that I'm operating with this team? And how can I create the right level of equality? And I want to be clear here. Equality doesn't mean, like, I always use this term peanut butter spreading, right? So like if we're delegating tasks and projects, it doesn't actually mean we're just literally making everything equal. It's just that we're providing equally fair opportunities for everyone. But at the end of the day, if Jill is a rock star and works really hard, and Bob is basically retired in place, like, I don't need to give them equal amount of projects because Bob has proved he doesn't really care anyways, right? So I want to, in my leadership style, I want to raise the people who want to be raised So I'm going to raise Jill. I'm not going to put a ton of energy into raising Bob. Okay. So equality doesn't necessarily mean peanut butter spread, but it does mean giving everyone fair and equal opportunities for your time to talk about career development and to give them a chance to say, hey, I want some of those projects too, or whatever those examples might be. Okay. Grow confidence in your leadership skills. I have this silly note, bye-bye imposter syndrome. Adam Grant has a really great book out right now called Think Again that talks a little bit. It's got this great visual. It talks about confidence and armchair quarterback syndrome, almost being overly confident, or how we can go past the zone and down into imposter syndrome. And the reality is imposter syndrome, even when it happens, what you need to remember is you may actually be the most competent person. It's just that you're seeing the way someone else is showing up and it's affecting your ability and your confidence. So just because someone else has more confidence than you, I'll tell you right now, it does not mean they are more competent than you. There is a good chance that you know more, you can do more, you're better, fill in the blank. Competence and confidence are two very different things. We want them to meet in the middle. That's the perfect sweet spot, this beautiful line on the graph where they meet in the middle, but just really lean into that competence that you have. Jill, who's one of our health and wellness coaches, has some amazing webinars on imposter syndrome. So those of you who mentioned that you suffer from that, I would strongly encourage you to take a watch of some of those on our YouTube channel, and just know that it is a topic that any coach in our organization will be equipped to talk about and work to grow confidence in whatever it is that you're working toward. Leadership, whatever it is, whatever those goals are that you want to work on. Okay, be humble, right? Be humble. Check the ego at the door. This might be new. Management and leadership might be new. It might be a little bit weird, especially if you are becoming a manager of your peers. Do your best, take a step back, check your ego at the door, be really humble, be servant, be there truly to serve those folks, remove those chains and those shackles of the perfect manager off your shoulders, and really just focus on what's going to help you and your team to be the best they can be. And hopefully it's, a combination of all of this, but maybe it's just the first two bullets right now. Okay, so in the chat, before we move on, I would just love to hear from some individuals. When you think about this idea of just being a better, great manager, and yeah, we're talking about managing peers, but even if you don't have that problem, which of these bullets really resonates for you? What's the thing that you're going to take away today and say, I need to take action on my ability to listen. I need to remove assumptions. I need to create equality. Like, what's one of the things for you that really stands out? Walk the walk, be a servant leader, ask questions before I respond. Oh, Sarah, yeah, we can talk about that for days. Listen a lot, create equality, good. That's going to look different for everyone. Grow confidence, kick this imposter syndrome. You got it, Rachel. My takeaway is I will not allow venting. Yes, that venting one is key. And now that you're watching for it, Jane, you'll be like, oh yeah, this is kind of going on everywhere. What's up? Start fresh, level set. There's no bad time to do that. Grow confidence and start fresh. Great. Seeing a lot of start freshes. That makes me happy, because what I want is for everyone to walk away from today. Yes, it's Think Again by Adam Grant is the book I was mentioning. I want everyone to walk away with, just a couple little actions or things that they want to do. So if all you walk away from is knowing I need to start fresh, and that means you pause and you stop and you take a step back and go, where am I at? And what do I need to do next? And you create, just a couple little bullets for yourself. That'll be great. So good. Confidence, boundaries, assumptions, venting. Again, a lot of good repeats. Great. I'm very happy that some of this is resonating. Okay. We're going to go ahead and move on. Prepare for one-on-one meetings with your team. We talked about that a little bit in the previous bullet. I do just want to highlight that we have a really great one-on-one template. You can access the link and download it from this bit.ly here. Again, case sensitive EMP, so employee template. What I want to highlight here kind of goes back to what we just talked about of listening more, pausing, being silent, allowing for some space, let them fill the space, right? So listen more, let them lead the conversation, ask questions, don't just provide solutions. What should I do? What do you think you should do? What might be some possible options? What might that look like for you? How would you define success? whatever it takes to kind of get them leading. So listen more than you speak. This template, I just have a little screenshot to show you. You can go download it for yourself, but it really talks about, it's the employee's tool to come in and say, okay, Manager Jen, here are the wins that I had this week. Here's some things going on that I really need to share. Here are some roadblocks or things I might need some help on. And then, hey, I want to talk about personal development. Here's my career goals. And then that feedback component is being optional, but it's a really good place to start having some two-way feedback, which we're going to, get into next, is talking a little bit about feedback. So if you don't have this conversation of feedback or this bullet of feedback on your agenda, it's really great because, hey, we know we need to all be better about giving and receiving feedback and doing more. I guarantee almost everyone needs to do more of it. Therefore, let's make it top of mind. Let's make it part of the regular conversation. Add it to the agenda. If you have any questions on one-on-one meetings, go ahead and drop them in the chat. But I think this is just going to be a good tool to start getting you set up for success. Give and receive feedback effectively. So I already kind of mentioned how we have a couple really great feedback trainings out there. I do want you to go watch those if you want a detailed look at how to give feedback better. We have very specific framework that we use. But I want to also just sort of put the bug in your ear to think about receiving feedback. If you are not asking for feedback from others and receiving it well, how would you expect them to be comfortable receiving it from you? This really needs to be a two-way dialogue. It needs to be a new habit that's created. So there needs to be this comfort level between giving and receiving, okay? So if you find that you're not great about receiving feedback, I want you to really think about a few things first. Well, first of all, reflect on maybe when you've done it well, when you haven't done it well, how's it shown up for you? And just start thinking through maybe what some of your triggers are and just what your past with it might be. This will help you start thinking about the future. But if you know you're about to have a feedback conversation, just kind of remind yourself to be prepared. Like, all right, I'm going to be present. I'm going to hear this message. I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm going to listen. And I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to listen without interruption. And then what I like to highlight with feedback is you don't have to respond right at that moment. You don't have to respond right at that moment. And frankly, you don't even have to respond to every piece of feedback. I do workshops all the time, and sometimes the feedback is the goofiest things. Someone might not like that I took a sip of water in the middle of the presentation. Well, am I going to stop doing that? No. So you have to determine what feedback is worth hearing and taking action on. I challenge you to be really careful with that. I don't want you to overthink that message and just go, well, Jen said I don't have to take any feedback. You really need to understand that perception is reality. So whatever feedback you were given, someone had that perception at that moment for some reason, and think about what really needs to happen there. I gave the example of water. Maybe I will say, well, I'm not going to just completely cut that out, but if I hydrate up enough in advance, then perhaps I don't need to take sips throughout. Like, I can think of ways that it can apply to me. Decide what you're going to accept, do that reflection, but take action too. So if Jill gives me a piece of feedback, I really need to find some way to follow up and say, hey, message was heard. Here's what I'm going to do differently next time, type of thing. So just kind of keep that in mind. I'm going to leave you with one other just like really short thing on feedback. We have a quick feedback framework model that we use that I think works really well, which is simply, and I'm going to use Jill as my example. We get out of this meeting and Jill says to me, Jen, what do you think went well in your workshop today? I respond, and then she says, here's what I think went well in the workshop today. And then she says, Jen, what could you have done better in the workshop today? I respond, and then she gets to say, here's what I think you could have done better in the workshop today. So it's a very simple, easy two-way dialogue. And from a managerial standpoint, from Jill being my manager, when she asked that question of Jen, people are hard on themselves. So I'm like, oh gosh, there was a typo on this slide. I was too slow here. I didn't leave enough time for that. Then she gets this opportunity to say, Jen, I think you're being a little hard on yourself. Yeah, there's a couple opportunities. Let's work on the typos. Let's do this next time. But it doesn't feel as harsh. It's not just coming right at me from Jill right out of the gate. Jen, you had a typo, type of thing. So keep that in mind as we're thinking about a little bit that sort of back and forth, making it easier for both of you and creating that habit of that simple two-way dialogue. Okay, for growing your personal leadership brand, I'm just going to point everyone to our leadership style assessment. You have it right here, capital ALVLA. If you haven't taken it yet, please do. It will just give you from our perspective, which of the two kind of styles that we've created that you fall into. It's a great conversation to have with your coach if you're an existing client, to just sort of talk about what that means, what resonated for you. If there's certain areas that you have blind spots in that you want to build and grow and develop. But the key here too is just to really think about, what do you even want your brand to be? How do you want to show up? Is there someone you want to emulate? So when we talk about leadership style and showing up, you need to have some clarity around where you are and where you want to go before you can even take any action. So if you've done that pre-work, the next piece is to work with your coach. If you haven't done that pre-work, do that pre-work and get help walking through it if you need help walking through it. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight really quick as we migrate into the back end of our conversation, some of those next steps. So one, take that assessment if you have not yet. It's just fun. It's fun. It gets you thinking. It's a great dialogue. I want all of you to reflect on which pieces of the discussion today you feel like it's going to be most beneficial for you to set some goals around. Okay, so we've got A, B, C, and D here: managing former peers, effective one-on-ones, feedback, and leadership style. So just drop an A, B, C, D. Which one are you most focused on and going to set some goals around? I know we spend the bulk of our time in A, though a lot of the pieces really did sort of transcend into some of the other areas. So where are you going to be setting some goals around? Okay, good. Effective one-on-ones, feedback, managing former peers, feedback. Good. Okay. Well, here we go again, all over the board, which is great. That's good. So everyone's got some different things. Do each and every one of you who are responding to this, I'd love to just see just a little like yes or no. Did you write at least one action for yourself down today? Did you write at least one action for yourself down today? Yes, no. And if you answer no, that's okay. Thanks for your honesty. I would just challenge you as we're continuing through the last, 10-ish or so minutes here to write one of those down. So I'm seeing a lot of yeses. That's good. It's really important to me as a coach that everyone walks away with an action. Good. Looking at the template. Perfect. Great. Love it. And if you would like to share your specific goals, please don't hesitate to type those in. Others might benefit from seeing them and thinking about, ooh, yeah, that's a good one. I like that too, and add that to their list. Okay. So this is a good time to be dropping those in the chat as well. Okay. So again, set some of those goals. And then what I have down on here too, and we're going to talk a little bit about how Amalavita can support you. And I ask you to please hang on. There's nothing wild and crazy here. I'm not going to make you uncomfortable with a weird sales pitch or anything, but there's good information here that I think is extremely important for all of you to hear. Okay. So I have talked a little bit today about how a coach can support. I've given a couple little examples. What's really important to remember is that time with that individual who is, outside. They're not your manager. They're not your peer. They're not your partner. They're someone different that can ask you those really deep and powerful questions to really pull some of this genuine honesty out of you. If you looked at that managing former peers slide and heard me talking about it, well, let's say it this way. If you read all those bullets and you kind of go, oh, okay, yeah, those are good. That looks good. But then when I talk about it, you kind of hear that there's more to it, right? There's a lot more to it. It goes a lot deeper. You can think about coaching being a little bit that way, because your coach is going to ask you questions that are going to pull really good things out of you. Your coach is not just going to say, do you provide feedback? They're going to go a lot deeper. When was the last time you provided feedback? Explain to me what it looked like. How did the person react? What behavior changed from it? They're going to dig and dig and dig to help you realize, wow, just because, yes, I'm giving feedback doesn't mean I'm doing it well. Doesn't mean I'm doing it well. And I need to make some changes in my process, and I need to create some habits that are going to help me be successful and really help that other individual be successful. Okay. All right. So I just mentioned it. ALV team's here to help. I do want to walk through a couple specific examples. So we've talked a lot about coaching. There are some bullets here, but we do one-on-one coaching in all of these different areas. Like I mentioned, even the lovely Jill is one of our health coaches. But don't be too caught up around the buckets, right? And the reality is, if you need some support, if you have some goals to meet, come talk to us and we will help align you with the right coach. We have many coaches that specialize in many areas. And if imposter syndrome is your thing, you'll get matched with a coach that is really passionate about imposter syndrome, for example. We do one-on-one coaching, both for this personal, like if you just come in and say, hey, I'm ready, or with corporations, whether your corporation is sponsoring you or you're a manager and you say, I want to do coaching for myself and everyone on my team. And I have the budget to do that, and I want to go through it together. Okay, we set those programs up as well. And that's something that I do. So you can reach out to me specifically for that. Workshops, not too much different than today as far as like someone's facilitating it. Maybe there's some questions. Typically, our workshops will also have activities, breakout sessions, maybe even pre and post work, some different things like that. But we do workshops really truly on all different subjects, delegation, imposter syndrome, runs the gamut of everything and anything. So if there is something that your organization or your team is suffering with right now, maybe it's change, there's a lot of change going on. Maybe it's some challenges with how to work in this virtual and remote environment effectively. Those are things that we can do workshops on. So if you have some budget and you see some opportunity within your team for workshops, this is something we can talk about as well. These really do run 60, 90, 120, 180 minutes or all day. Leadership Accelerator. I love sharing this program because it's just super fun and it's great for our corporations. It's an opportunity to do those workshops that I mentioned, but also paired with group coaching and one-on-one coaching. So it's a really good time for teams and groups to kind of go through the whole process all together. Okay, so I'm actually going to skip to this slide. I just want to make sure that when we're talking about you being this great leader, we have that personal level and some of the stuff that we talked about today. And we also have your teams and setting your teams up for success. I've made it pretty clear that there's opportunities to really focus in on both of those areas. So that top link up there is related to corporate inquiries. If you're kind of like, yeah, I want to do a workshop or something, then great. That's a great starting point. And if you're ready to just talk about getting a coach matched up just for you individually, that link on the bottom is the one for you to look at. So I'm going to leave it here on the slide. There has been so much great conversation in the chat. I've been loving it. I really appreciate the participation. I do want to open it up in case anyone has a question maybe that did not get answered. So if you asked one earlier, Jill, you're welcome to let me know if I missed one of those. If not, you're welcome to type something in the chat here. We definitely have time for a couple questions. And as you probably have noticed, I'm a huge talker. So if nobody asks one, I'll probably just keep talking at you. But I'd love to hear some questions if there are any. I'm even just scrolling through the chat and there's just so much participation that it's okay, so let's see. Cheryl, you may have asked one here, similar to the sipping water example. What if your supervisor wants you to pass along feedback to your direct report that you disagree with? Oh, goodness. Like your supervisor thinks drinking water is absolutely unacceptable, but you don't think it's a big deal. How do you deliver this feedback, or do you do it at all? So I think this is a great question. And I hate to say that it depends, and there's a number of factors, but sometimes that is a little bit of the reality in the sense of, if you are comfortable, the starting point would be having that conversation with your manager and giving them feedback and exploring a little bit around what it is about the sipping of the water that is a problem related to the individual being able to get their work done. So this is a good chance for you to think about leading up and managing up. And I'm not trying to make that sound like it's super easy, but basically do all of those things we just talked about from a transparency and vulnerability and one-on-one conversation standpoint, and have that conversation up. And depending on the relationship you have with your leader, the response may be something you like, and maybe something you don't like. They may be open to the feedback and the coaching and help you and work through it, or they may just say, sorry, you have to deliver this feedback. And then you'll have to kind of figure out what makes the most sense to do so, where you're still setting that boundary of not saying something like, my manager said I have to tell you this, right? Because that just really reduces credibility. So trying to find a way to maintain credibility, but deliver a message that will hopefully be helpful for the individual and not hurtful for the individual. But I encourage that leading and managing up for sure. How do you prepare when the entire agency is new? I assume just going in fresh. Yeah, that's a great question, Robert. You could probably even find some good tools and resources out on the internet, just as far as that kind of, it's not a business case, but that's kind of like the silly word that pops to mind for me. But I think what's going to be really important is thinking about why we're here, vision, mission. What are we trying to accomplish, right? Like starting up at that just crazy high top level, and making sure everyone really knows the importance and the value of why we're here. There's a really great, Robert, there's a really great TED Talk by Simon Sinek. I think it's called like How Great Leaders Inspire Action, but it's really around starting with why. So I think if you even type Simon Sinek, start with why or something like that, it will pop up. And I think that one is really good. And I think that will give you some perspective, because typically what happens is we just sort of like jump in and we say, okay, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Oh, by the way, here's why we're doing it. But if we really flip that dialogue around and we get everyone really inspired, here's why we're doing everything we're doing. Oh, by the way, here's how we're going to do it. And then here's what it looks like or whatever. But the idea is you're flipping it around a little bit to inspire that big action. That's a really good starting point. And then how can you open the dialogue, even if you have to literally bring in a facilitator or someone to help with that dialogue, but how do you open it up so that everyone feels safe, create psychological safety and trust? We've got some workshops on that so that everyone is willing to participate, so that you don't feel like it's the Robert show and it's not just you standing there talking, but everyone's participating. So like, what are those really great questions that you can ask to start getting others to join in and participate and join the dialogue? And you'll find out real quick if everyone's just sitting there like this, maybe there's not enough trust yet or something along those lines. Great question. I miss part of the website for the additional events, bit.ly. Yeah, I think it's /events. Capital ALV, lowercase events, I think. We'll put it in the follow-up. I'm sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. But you can also go to our website, alvcoaching.com, and you can find the direct link up in the toolbar up at the top. Oh, thanks, Katie. There's the Simon Sinek TED Talk. Perfect. It's 2:01. Of course, you are fully excused and welcome to bounce off. If anyone has any other questions, you're welcome to chat them in. I'll hang out here just for another moment in case we see any more. And Jill, like Jill said, she'll put all these great links in the recap, which is fabulous. I mean, this has been great dialogue. It may feel a little bit strange for you because you're not hearing voices as much. You're just hearing Jen, but I can confirm you've had great participation. I really appreciate everyone jumping in and responding, because it really does help to drive the direction of the conversation. And I hope that all of you will take some time to really think about what your goals might be. Talk to your company about whether you can get some funds for sponsorship. And if not, it's not the end all be all, but what might some workshops look like, some one-on-one coaching? What does it look like for you? And how are you going to take all of this stuff and create some really good habits? Who's ready to have the mirror in front of them and really, make sure that we know what our great points are that we need to leverage and maybe our blind spots that we need to overcome are. All right. I could literally talk all day. So any other questions? I think we're probably about it. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous. So that's probably it, right, Jill? Anything else?
No, this is great. And also something to note, Jenny probably already mentioned this. So in the recap email, we'll send that out. But also include Jen's email, which Jennifer@albcoach.com. But we'll include all of that. So if any other questions do come up after all of this has settled in and decompressed, you can do that as well. So, yeah. And then also just reply, if you want to reply right to that email, that's me behind it, sending it. So you can ask any questions there too. Yeah. But thank you all so much for joining. And thank you, Jen, for your expertise as always. Much appreciated.
Well, it was super fun. Great dialogue again. If you haven't, register for the event next week too. And have a great one, everyone. And reach out if you have questions.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.